You are listening to the Marc Guzman podcast experience.
Okay, we're live.
For real, we're live now.
For real, we're live. Okay,
Yes.
So welcome to another episode of Ask Marc Anything. We've got a few good questions that I think if you're a tenant, you really want to listen to this episode. And let's just jump right into it.
All right, so these are questions that I kind of came up with during my most recent house search.
How was that, by the way?
Good, actually, we're signing the lease tonight.
Congratulations.
So, yeah, very excited for that.
Yeah, it's always funny or different, right? When you're going through that process,
Yeah.
It's completely different.
Definitely. But yeah, no, it's a nice little neighborhood right by the Concord Airport. So
Yeah,
looking
nice.
forward. So first question is, what are 3 questions you should ask when a property manager or landlord is showing you a house?
Okay, so if the landlord or property manager is actually showing the property, that's a prime opportunity to ask as many questions as you can to really get all the details on the rental, because many times there's more to it other than just a price. So number one, I think you need to ask who's responsible for what utilities. There's water, there's garbage, there's sewer, there's also gas and electricity. Now, depending on what you're renting, you're usually going to be responsible for gas and electricity. Water, garbage, depending on the property, if it's an apartment or if it's separately metered, you want to ask the property manager or the landlord what utilities are covered. Question number 2, I would ask about landscaping if you're renting out a single family home. Who's responsible for taking care of the front yard, the backyard? Is it low maintenance, high maintenance? That's something to really consider when you're renting out a property. And then I think if you're going to be renting out an apartment, you want to look at parking. So ask the property manager or the landlord about parking. In some areas, especially in rent control areas, it's very popular for parking to be an additional fee, and that can range anywhere from $30 a month up to $100 or $200 a month, and that would be a whole separate agreement besides your standard rental agreement. So I think the parking situation, how many parking spots do you get, especially if you're in an apartment complex, and is there an additional fee for parking? So I think between those 3, utilities, landscaping, and parking, I think are top 3 questions you should ask when you're at a showing.
All right, this next question is, when a rental ad on Craigslist says no smoking, does that only apply to tobacco, or is marijuana included too? And does that mean no smoking in the house only, or just on the property as a whole?
Okay, so that'll depend on what is stated in the actual lease agreement. So if an ad, whether it's Craigslist or Zillow, says no smoking, that's kind of implied to mean no smoking of anything, including marijuana, on the premises. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to what's in the actual written lease agreement that you as a tenant sign with the landlord and management company. Most leases are going to have what's called a no smoking policy, and this no smoking policy will clearly outline whether if you can smoke marijuana or not, or if you can smoke tobacco or not. Most of the time, probably 95% of the time, it's going to be no smoking of any substance. So no tobacco, no marijuana. But there are, in some cases, for example, apartment buildings that do have designated smoking areas. So this smoking policy that's attached to the lease agreement will also clearly define if there is a smoking area. So you can smoke outside, but maybe not inside of the unit. Sometimes smoking policies will say there's no smoking allowed on the premises, which means inside or outside, even if you're in the front yard, backyard, whatever, no smoking. So it really depends on the smoking policy that's attached to the rental agreement. And if you're a landlord and smoking is a big deal to you, then you want to make sure that you have a clearly laid out smoking policy in your lease agreement.
And lastly, what are some of the more common reasons a rental application is rejected, and what can I do to make sure my application goes through?
So every property owner and management company should have minimum financial requirements that tenants have to meet. And if there's multiple applications, then usually it's going to be based on the highest and best qualified candidate. So that's based on income, credit score, do you have collections, evictions, rental history, that sort of thing. What I see the most common is credit score. Your credit score is not high enough to meet minimum qualifications, and or you have no credit score whatsoever. So that's probably the most common form of denial that I've seen. But there are ways to get around that, and not get around it by being sneaky. That's not what I mean, but things you can do to help out your application. So number one is everyone should be getting a free copy of their credit report every single year. And take a look at your credit report, see what's hurting your score, see why your score is below 600, below 650, below whatever the minimum requirement is when you're applying for a rental property. See what you can do to fix that score. Sometimes it's about paying off some collections and getting those collections off. Many times you can contact collection agencies that have collections, and instead of just paying it off, where then your credit report gets updated to then show a collection was paid, what you may want to do is see if they would be willing to mask it off your credit report if you pay off the collection or pay off a certain percentage of the collection. So that's also an option. Sometimes some collection agencies and creditors will agree to it, so it's worth an ask. If it's something that's really old, you might be able to dispute it. Talk to the credit agencies or go to their websites. They have different dispute forms that you can complete online to dispute different things. Also look at the debt to your high limit on credit cards and various other trade lines. So for example, if you have a credit card that has a $1,000 limit, but you have an $800 balance on it, your credit score is going to be dinged greatly because of that, because you're pretty much near the high limit. But if you paid off that debt or maybe transferred some of that debt to a different credit card that had a very low balance, you'll be surprised how much credit scores change by simply moving debt around or paying down a credit card. So there are different things you can do. One other bit of advice, if you've been following me for a few years, I've made videos about this, and it really, really helps, is if you have no credit score, put together a credit report that you can then provide to people with your application. So what credit really is just to determine how worthy of you what's your credit risk and credit worthiness. What's the likelihood that you're going to pay back that debt? That's what people use a credit score and credit report to analyze. So if you have no credit score, one thing I recommend is you'll be surprised what you pay on a monthly basis that doesn't get reported to credit agencies. So for example, if you pay your monthly cell phone bill, print out the last 12-month payment history for that. That shows good payment history for the last 12 months of something that you're paying consistently every single month. So your phone bill, Netflix, Hulu, car insurance, health insurance, anything that you pay on a monthly basis, print out the last 12-month history, put that together. You can, if you really want to, you can put together a very organized summary sheet followed by the copy of payment history for the last 12 months. And you basically are creating your own credit report that you can then give to people when you complete an application. And so you'll be surprised how much that really helps applications. And again, if you have no credit score, this is a really easy way for the landlord to look at your payment history of other debt and then determine if you're a good risk at paying their rent.